I can't even be happy within my own personal alone time without feeling shame. Something is very much so off. Shame is a very low vibrational frequency. You are undermining your own self-confidence. It's one thing to have shame, it's another thing to have toxic shame. You are in a place of perpetual guilt. Okay, so we are going to talk about self-destructive patterns. Okay, so I'm going to make this a series, and in this first series, this first episode, we are going to talk about toxic shame. Okay, shame is like the next level after guilt. Guilt and shame are two very different things. Okay, shame is where you take it on as if this is this is a belief about yourself. You know, it's a perception that you have about yourself. Whereas guilt, it allows space for self-reflection. You know, it's a recognition of a behavior or an attitude in your life. When you get to shame, especially toxic shame, you are in a place of perpetual guilt. And once it becomes toxic, you can't even participate in normal activities without feeling shame. When you're home alone, you feel guilty about whatever you're doing in your own space, in your alone time. And when you get to that place, that is a self-destructive behavior that needs attention immediately. So typically people who deal with a lot of depression in their life typically suffer from toxic shame. Typically, if you are taking this on as, you know, a perception or a belief in your life, you've already recognized it, which is a great thing. That's the first step. That's the very first step when you're trying to improve anything in your life. You know what I'm saying? You need to be able to recognize it and know what is going on with yourself. So you already have that self-knowledge of, okay, I feel this way, right? And a lot of times I understand it can come from a place of, okay, well, I did this thing and I never apologized for it, or I did this thing and maybe I apologized, but it was so bad, it was so tragic, I don't know how to get over this, I don't know how to get past this. If you are at that point and you can recognize this, that you're still at a place where you can move forward from this. You're still at a place where you can heal from this. But you don't want to get into this self-destructive pattern to where you can't release yourself from this. You don't ever feel any, you know, peace in your life because you have this overwhelming sense of shame. So what does this look like? Toxic shame can look very different for different people, but typically it looks like a lot of damaging self-criticism. This looks like a damaged or bruised ego, very, very, very low self-esteem, not allowing space for any error or mistakes, not allowing any room for growth. Shame is a very low vibrational frequency, so you're always going to feel low. You might have a tendency to overeat. Probably you indulge in a lot of sweets because you feel a lot of emotion behind the shame that you have. Once you get to the point of, one, you've recognized that you have this issue, two, what behavior traits you're representing, what your attitude is like on a daily basis, or especially what your attitude looks like on your own, in your own home when you're alone. It's one thing to have shame, it's another thing to have toxic shame. Toxic shame looks a little different. Toxic shame looks like you don't even allow yourself peace when you're by yourself. We want to pay attention to these negative behavioral traits to see how we can move forward out of it. Once you're able to recognize your behavior traits, your attitudes, you'll be able to pick up on how this manifests, meaning how this looks in your life to yourself or to other people. So it can look like, you know, a lot of isolation. Isolation is not bad. I say this often in my videos. Isolation can help you when you are trying to change your life, when you are trying to manifest something new. Isolation is necessary, but you do not want to self-isolate all the time. That can be toxic. And when you are dealing with toxic shame, isolation is not healthy at all, because if you're alone with your thoughts, you feel all of this shame in your life, that can lead to, you know, self-harming, you know, suicidal thoughts. So another way to recognize if you are in this place of toxic shame is to recognize when you are undermining your own self-confidence, right? Let's say you have been in a career for the last, 15, 20 years of your life. You know, you've mastered this, you can do this like it's like the back of your hand, but you start second guessing your work. You start questioning if you've done this right, or you start obsessing over the details, even though you know this work like the back of your head. You start to second guess your own self-confidence in what you're doing. That is a way to recognize, like, something is off here, because you know that you don't need to be questioning that work. You've been doing it for how many years? You've never had any issues. Nobody's ever pointed anything out to you. So start checking in with what you're used to doing, your environment. Are you developing further, or are you stuck in a place that you've never been in before? That is a way to recognize there's something going on. Something is very much so off. And I might be self-sabotaging, questioning yourself in areas that you've perfected essentially, or that you've mastered, is a way to recognize that something is off in your life. Okay, so how do we move forward out of this self-destructive behavior of toxic shame? First things first is you have to want change. You cannot expect to have change if you don't seek it for yourself, if you don't desire it for yourself. You cannot change for other people. That can be a motivation, but you have to want to change for yourself first. You first, okay? You have to want change for yourself first. So, first things first, you have to recognize the triggers. I always say this, no matter what mental health issue you're working on, you have to recognize what triggers you. You can also be at a point where you're not even being triggered anymore. This is just this has been going on so much in your life that this is a behavior and an attitude that you have just taken on fully. You know what I'm saying? It's now part of your personality. That does not mean it's permanent. You have room to change. Everybody has room to change. As long as you have breath in your lungs, you have room to change, okay? So what you want to do is you want to sit down and recognize what in my childhood caused me to get to a point where I am taking on this perpetual state of guilt, so much so that I cannot move forward in my life. I can't even be happy within my own personal alone time without feeling shame. Typically, this starts in childhood. Something about how our parents or our loved ones, whoever raised us, taught us to take responsibility about something we did wrong, something we did bad, some kind of harm we caused. Something about how we were taught to forgive ourselves for the bad things that we've done in our life. Something about the inner critic within. So we have to sit down and figure out where this started. Because you don't get to a point as an adult where you are just living in this state of shame based on one mistake or one hiccup you had in your life. I encourage you to take the time to self-reflect, to see how you were taught to handle these situations, or how you would have handled this situation as a child. Because believe it or not, and this is hard for people to believe, but once you do the inner work, once you do the inner child work, you will understand this. Every situation and behavior trait that we have in our adult life manifested from how we would have handled situations or how we were taught to handle situations as a child. That manifests in your adult life, and that's how you handle situations in your adult life. So if you take the time to self-reflect, if you take the time to go into your memory bank in your mind, in your brain, and sit back and say, as a child, if I made a mistake, what would my parents or my loved ones or whoever raised you, what would they have done? How would they encourage me to handle this situation? Or let's say you were alone a lot, nobody was there to actually encourage you or teach you. So you self-isolated in a toxic way. So you ignore a lot, you know what I'm saying? You block things out. You try to pretend it's not there. But if you self-reflect, if you take the time to sit down and figure this out, you will understand where that came from and how it has manifested in your adult life. Finally, you have to forgive yourself. Take a deep breath with me. Take however many deep breaths you need. Cry if you need to. You have to forgive yourself. Maybe you're not at a point where the person, or if you harmed a person or you damaged the person or you caused a mistake in someone else's life or in your business or whatever's causing that toxic shame in your life. Maybe you're not at a place where you've heard the forgiveness words from them. They forgive you. Or maybe you'll never hear that. You might never hear that, by the way. But you have to forgive yourself. You develop this in your life. You develop this self-destructive behavior in your life. So if you don't forgive yourself, it's always going to be there. You have to get to a point where you forgive yourself and you love yourself and you move forward. Yes, you made a mistake. Yes, you had a bad issue. And by the way, it probably wasn't that bad to begin with. It probably wasn't even that bad to begin with. You know what I'm saying? Remember that there's levels to it. Right now, we're just trying to work out the issue with ourselves. You might not even be in a place where you're ready to go to the person or, fix the situation. You always have space and room to fix it. I want you to understand that. But you have to start with yourself first. Start with yourself first.